Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A dervish was distressed that he was having trouble sitting still and praying and or meditating. And he couldn't get comfortable anywhere. And he kept trying to find a place that was comfortable, and nothing seemed to work for him. So he went to his sheikh and explained all this. He said, I can't find a place where I'm comfortable in order to meditate or to pray. Maybe I should go into the jungle. And the sheikh said, yes, go into the jungle. So the next day, he packed some provisions and went deep into the jungle. He found a cave, and he thought that would be a good place to be able to stay. But then when evening came, he noticed that there were lions and tigers who were using the caves in that area, and probably the cave he was going to go into also. And he saw snakes coming all around him, and he heard all kinds of animals and noises, and essentially became terrified. So instead of going into the cave, he climbed the nearest big tree, got as high as he could, and spent the evening literally frightened almost to death in the tree. When dawn came, he came down from the tree and ran as quickly as he could to come back into the city and be with the sheikh. And he then recounted his adventure in the jungle for the sheikh. He said, I went there to find peace, but I couldn't find any peace there. It's worse than here. There were animals everywhere. I was afraid for my life. I thought I would be killed. There were lions and tigers and snakes and all kinds of animals and all kinds of noises. I didn't have a moment of peace. Why did you send me to the jungle? Did you try to kill me? He said to the sheikh. And the sheikh said to him, no, I told you to go to the jungle to try and kill the things that don't give you any peace. And this brings up the situation that we are in. Why don't we have peace? Why don't we have contentment? What is it that keeps us from being peaceful and being content? Well, it all begins with our ego and the various places where our ego takes us. Our ego sets us up to be a predominant being, to be an important being, to be a successful being, to be a powerful being, to be a famous being, to be an accomplished being. And when we run into roadblocks as to all of these goals that we set, we begin to suffer. We suffer because we aren't accomplished enough. We suffer because we aren't wealthy enough. We suffer because we haven't achieved enough. We suffer because we're not famous enough. We suffer because we don't have enough. We suffer because we haven't been able to obtain the things that our ego projects for us that are necessities for existence. And how does all this happen? How did we get to this point where we are this mass of needs and we are constantly trying to fill these needs, and not having fulfillment of these needs causes this suffering to the point where we can't find peace, we can't find contentment, we can't find a place to get away from it. It begins with desire, this need that we have. And from the moment that we're born, we have desire. We desire our mother's breast. We desire water. We desire air. These are all necessities. As we grow, this desire spreads. And desire becomes illusion. And then this illusion becomes the mind. And inside the mind, there is this dark space. And this dark space is filled with the glitters in existence. And these glitters in existence manifest as images of the world. So the mental images that this mind has becomes the world. We then take on this world as our reality, and we play out our life in these mental images that we have created internally. So we create an act to correspond to the mental images. This act becomes our life. And in truth, this entire act is a bubble. It's a dream. It's a fantasy. And all of our suffering comes from these mental images and this fantasy that we live. The Sheikh answered the question, where can I find peace? And his answer was, where you and I don't exist. And where's the place to find peace? Wherever you are, as long as you and I don't exist. So if we are serious about understanding existence, if we are serious about understanding this life, if we truly want to get beyond illusion and beyond the fantasy life that we create for ourselves, we have to begin to attempt to understand what reality is, how reality affects us, and where reality can be found. Now, to find it, for starters, we have to slow ourselves down. To find it, we also have to somehow put the ego to rest and learn that the ego is in a constant state of creating difficulties for us and putting us in situations that are going to make us suffer. As long as we are interested in the outcome of the things that the ego presents before us, we are going to be in a path that makes us suffer. Because whatever we come up with and whatever situations we resolve, no matter how difficult they may be, there's no rest, because the mind never stops creating new dilemmas. The mind never stops creating new scenarios. The mind never stops creating new dramas. We all live in our little soap opera, and every day is another chapter in our soap opera. And this soap opera doesn't end until we pass. So when you're watching soap operas, don't you wish sometimes that there would be a conclusion? Well, just like life, there is no conclusion. The only conclusion that can happen is for the drama to end, our drama to end, our egocentric involvement to end, our suffering to end. The Buddha, who said all life is suffering, gave the following solution. He said, become homeless and go live in the woods with a begging bowl. Don't worry about where your meals come from. Don't worry about anything. Well, this worked for some, and for many it didn't work, because they worried about what kind of food they would get. They worried about who would feed them. They worried about who would get the most. They just worried. We, as a being, tend to worry. And why do we worry? Because we don't know what's going to happen next. Not knowing what's going to happen next instills fear in us as to what the future holds for us. Well, how can we come to the place where that fear leaves us and where we no longer are a slave to our egocentric drive and our egocentric needs? When does it stop? When do we get to the point where we say, this is enough already? I've gone through this enough already. For some people, it never stops. For others, they are able to come to a conclusion and be satisfied, be content. But that contentment is always inherent upon the loss of this self-identity and all of the needs that this self-identity has, all of the desires that this self-identity has, all of the mental illusions and gymnastics that this self-identity has, all of the ideas that this self-identity has. The reason the Quran says there is a whisperer who is constantly whispering into your ear, Satan, is because it's so. There is a constant noise coming at you as to what you need to do, what you need to accomplish, what your next step should be, where to go, how to go, when to go, what to do, to the point where it overwhelms your daily life and creates the drama that we live in, creates all of the difficulties for us. Now, there are certain things that catch us, that are like magnets that draw us into this drama. One of the main ones is praise and blame. It's astonishing how susceptible man is to praise. It's astonishing how the most bright people can be manipulated through praise and through constant praise. And it's also amazing how when you praise somebody, they'll constantly show up at your door for more. The cobra needed a meal, so he stood at the edge of, or laid at the edge of the pond and began to tell the frog how beautiful he was and how the frog was the most beautiful creation in all of God's kingdom. Now, you've all seen frogs. Frogs are far from beautiful, but that has nothing to do with what the frog thinks of itself. The frog, of course, thinks it is the most beautiful thing there is. And as the snake began to tell it how beautiful it was, it also said, I need you to come closer to me and closer to me and closer to me so I can appreciate your beauty more and appreciate you more. Finally, the frog goes within striking distance. And as the snake grabs him and begins to swallow him, the frog begins to understand that he's been fooled and he's been taken advantage of. And what did it to him? His need for praise. We need to detach ourselves from praise and from blame. Blame makes us suffer. Praise makes us joyful. Neither of these should have an effect on us, and neither of these should be the driving forces in our existence. Praise and blame are always at the forefront of our difficulty. If we can remove ourselves from praise and blame, we can move forward in a more balanced way to find reality. There's a story that talks about the differences in the passage of time from the time of the prophet. And it says that when the prophet was alive, people understood the truth directly from the prophet through the resonance that existed there. When the prophet passed, people understood the truth through the memory of those who were with him and through the retelling of the reality that existed when he was around. After those people passed, people understood the truth through their own conscience about knowing that it existed and knowing that that resonance existed and trying to fulfill that because they felt bad that they didn't. So they had remorse over the fact that they weren't in contact anymore. They knew that it was important and they created that contact again. Finally, it gets to the point where people lose all contact with reality. They lose all contact with the reasons that the prophets came. They lose all contact with truth, and they do things only for reward or for fear of punishment. And that's why when you go into many places of worship, the basis of their teaching is either do this or get punished, because the people who are setting forth what is supposed to be the truth are in that place themselves, where they only understand things through reward and punishment. So they cannot be in a state where they just give love and explain that the answer to the dilemma is to go to a place of love and to enter into a place of love. It can't be done unless you know it yourself. Clergymen are in that situation. Clergymen are in that position. We need to remove ourselves from that place of praise and blame and enter into an actual search for reality. And the question is, how do we go about doing it? Where do we go about doing it? Well, the time and place for all of it is now. There is no future. There's only now. All that exists for us is now. And until we understand that all that exists for us is now, man, for the most part, lives his life in the imaginations of what's going to happen next. And it has to be understood that that's an imaginary existence. It's an illusory existence. It's an existence that isn't framed in any kind of reality. So we need to be able to bring ourselves into a place that is now, that is here, and that we are comfortable in, that we can find peace in. Now, you'll notice that when you're in a peaceful place, you have no thought of the future. You have no thought of needs. You have no thought of desires. You have no thought of what you're lacking, because you're satisfied. We can't be satisfied as long as we are lacking. We can't be satisfied as long as desire is gnawing at us. We can't be content until we find a space where things are at peace. So we need to go and focus internally as opposed to externally. We should know that externally the answers don't exist. And even though the entire world is telling you that there are external answers to everything, external answers don't exist. There has to be a refocus towards ourselves internally. Ali, in making fun of the world and at least trying to show its nature and its illusory nature, said once, there are 6 basic things in the world, and you need to understand them. The best thing that you can eat in this world is honey. And honey comes from the excrement of bees. The best, or the vomit of bees. The best thing that you can wear in this world is silk. And silk comes from the excrement of bugs. The best thing that you can drink in this world is water. And water is plentiful everywhere. It has no distinction between men. It doesn't make you higher or lower. It just is something that you have to have. The best thing you can ride in this world is a horse. And a horse is what leads you into battle. and brings you to your death. The highest thing that man gave us in this life was marriage. And the highest point of marriage is union between man and woman. And where does that union come? It comes where men and women urinate. So he said, don't take this life too seriously. Take it as a bubble. Understand that this life is a passageway. This life just is an interim situation, an interim stop on the way to truth. But for us to be able to do that in our own lives, we have to figure out a way to detach ourselves from all of these inclinations that our egocentric self has. And to do that, we have to become cognizant of the way we think. We have to become cognizant of how our mind works, and we have to become cognizant of the influence that our mind has on us. If we can't or won't or don't do that, we will never find peace. We have to break this mental pattern that we have that is ongoing, unceasing, unending, and doesn't stop. There has to be a detachment from it. We need to release ourselves from the workings of our own mind. Now, that doesn't mean the mind will stop. That means we've released ourselves from the obligation to carry out the influence of what the mind is telling us, that we've released ourselves from that ongoing process, and we've brought ourselves to a place where that influence no longer pushes and pulls us. This is how we become enslaved. We become slaves of our own mind. We become slaves to our own ideas. And who do our ideas come from? They come from our parents, they come from our teachers, they come from the world, they come from the nations that we live in, they come from the languages that we speak. They're different everywhere, but they are doing the same thing to everyone all over the world, and that is holding them in place where man can't find a place of peace within himself. Now, one of the things that some of us did when we were younger was we discovered this truth. We discovered that we couldn't find peace in the world, and the world was driving us in a way that we had become tired of. It was making us, to say, to use the common vernacular, making us crazy. So we were looking for a place to find peace. And we began to look for men who were able to talk about peace. And we were fortunate enough, some of us, to find a sheikh. And then what happened? We changed lifestyles. We changed lifestyles in that instead of chasing the world and using the world as a guide, we began chasing the sheikh and using the sheikh as a guide, using the sheikh to interact with as to all of our situations and all of our dilemmas. This was a major change in the way we lived. This is the lifestyle of what some people call a dervish, some people call a devotee, some people call a disciple. When we have come to the conclusion that we can't follow our own mind because our mind is not taking us anywhere that we actually want to end up. And so we change our allegiance. We change our allegiance from ourself to the sheikh, who becomes the guide that takes us to all of the appropriate places, all of the appropriate ports, all of the appropriate landing spots that we need to go to. And in doing that, a lot of things happen. You stop your interaction with the world on a full-time basis, where if you don't do something like this, your interaction with the world never ceases and becomes more and more involved and more intense. And as we get older, it becomes more and more intense because you don't know any other way. So what we need to find is this other way. And you find it by finding somebody who has understood this other way, and you look to them for guidance. This was the reason the prophets came. This was the reason the Ketubs came. This is the reason that God sends people into this world for guidance so that we can leave the suffering that the mind brings to each of us, to show us how to break from that and enter into a different lifestyle. Imagine talking to friends who have no concept of this and telling them that your best moments are when you're sitting on a floor in front of a man who's talking about truth, that your involvement with the world, your involvement with wealth, your involvement with fame, your involvement with accomplishments, all of these involvements have somehow ended and have somehow been stopped. And in stopping that, you were able to find peace. Now, we need to take that and use that to understand our present situation. If the place when we were the happiest and when we were the most peaceful and we were the most calm was when we were removed from the world through our own choice, but we removed ourselves from the world and were able to focus on not the world, but on truth, was when we found a place of contentment. Shouldn't we begin to do that now? Shouldn't we begin to create space in our life where we remove ourselves from the world? And this is what we need to do. We need to be able to create space to remove ourselves from the influence of the world. And until we do that, we will continue to act out the illusion that we exist within the imaginary creation that our mind has created for us. The way out is to cut our ties. The way out is to find contentment, but it doesn't come from obtaining the world. It comes from another place. It comes from reality and learning what reality is. And this is the path that we're on, trying to learn what reality is. And it begins with love and with kindness. And so we have to increase our love, increase our kindness, and then the rest will be shown to us slowly as we become ready to accept more and more. May Allah bring us to that state where truth is available to us, where we are available to truth, where we are ready to open up our arms and accept reality. May Allah take us all to that place. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.